welcome to Integrate or Die. I'm Steve Hunt.
And I'm Jordan Katz.
So this week we spoke with Mike Hudy, who works for HireVue. HireVue is a company, probably one of the leading, I think, Jordan companies actually when it comes to like automated interviewing and selection systems to help with better hiring decisions. So Jordan, what were some of the things that you took away from the conversation?
First of all, the amount of data that's circulating around the entire candidacy and hiring process is immense. And there's an imperative to wrap our arms around it and figure out what's going on and how uh, behaviors and elements of the process can lead to better outcomes. But also that there's all different types of options for all different types of use cases. So one size doesn't fit all, but your hiring process should be optimized to the way it works the best for your candidates and your company.
Yeah. I think that that idea that, there are different ways that work for different companies, the kind of job. The two things, well, a lot from this conversation, because he really is, Mike's right on the forefront of often what is a pretty controversial area too, using technology to guide hiring decisions. And he had some really good insights. One, talking about, which is something I've long felt about, the predictive value of, hey, we've got a lot of data, as your point, using it to make better decisions. And his point to say, and realizing that we're never going to have a perfect hiring decision. Is it better than the alternative? And often the alternative is an untrained, highly subjective manager judging somebody based on how they look. So, that using technology to do that. The other thing that I thought was really powerful, and he was sort of a critique of the whole staffing technology area, is he said, historically, the way people got jobs is they looked at job ads, classified job ads, and they wrote resumes about themselves and they matched them. And he said,
Mhm.
if you actually look at the way we're doing it now, it's just really sophisticated versions of the same thing where we describe jobs, but we know job descriptions are often terrible. They don't capture what really matters. And because often hiring managers who are doing it don't really know how to describe a job. And then we ask candidates to describe themselves. And we also know from psychology, people aren't very good at describing themselves. And Mike really challenging the field to say we have to break past what is basically a highly sophisticated automation of a very old process that never worked that well to begin with. So let's listen to Mike. All right. Well, hey, Mike, thanks so much for appearing on Integrate or Die. We always start the show by telling you why we think you should be on the show. And for you, it's, you and I, we go all the way back to grad school, actually. We've known each other for a long time. But that's not the reason why, although being an Ohio State graduate by itself should be enough. No, the answer is that you have really had a career focused on using technology and developing very sophisticated technologies to help with staffing and selection and hiring decisions. You're kind of expert in that area of technology. How would you describe, though, your area of expertise when it comes to HR technology? What is it you know a lot about?
Yeah. So first of all, Steve and Jordan, appreciate you having me on. Excited about the Integrate or Die podcast. Yeah. So I think maybe the way you described it makes it sound even better. But yeah. So the expertise really is, simply put, it's about helping companies make better hiring decisions. And there is a science to that, and that science is delivered through and only enabled through technology, and that is only innovated through the 2 decades that I've been doing this. And as you said, my background is first, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and have my whole career has been in the talent acquisition, talent evaluation space. This idea of helping companies make better hiring decisions. And key part of the story is back in early 2000s, started a company that was really focused on pre-employment assessment. And then the space just changed so dramatically. We grew, we acquired a interview technology company. So we started to put together pieces of the hiring process, pre-employment assessment, technology-enabled interview, workflow management, automatic scheduling, just owning more of that kind of apply to hire space. And then most recently, we got acquired by a competitor, HireVue, and now we're kind of the biggest at doing that in kind of the helping companies hire better. What HireVue says is really trying to match talent to opportunity. So the expertise is really around talent acquisition, and it's around helping companies hire better. And when I say better today means at speed. You need to, for the candidate as well as the company, speed is of the essence, but speed doesn't really matter if you're not getting the right person. So it's about getting a person who's going to perform well, they're going to stay there. And it's also about doing it fairly. It's about enhancing diversity for organizations. So when I say helping companies hire better, better encapsulates all of those things.
Wow, fascinating. So 2 decades, what is the big learnings that you've had from doing this? If you just sort of in general, when it comes to building technology to enable better hiring, what have been some like just major learnings from your experience?
Yeah, I think really it's been about like there is, I mentioned I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So there's this whole science of understanding candidates, mapping them to jobs. And what we've done well is kind of the intersection of, okay, you have that science, and that's really only in the lab that it works that way.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to do then is say, how do I extrapolate this to the real world? And the real world is always changing. And organizations are always going to have constraints around what they can actually do. So I need to stay true to the science, but how do I then leverage the latest technology, what organizations are dealing with, and the goal is really doing it better. It's not the gold standard of like, we did this in the lab and this is what we found, because that's kind of useless. It's here's the alternative. We have recruiters looking at resumes and then hiring managers interview. How can we be better than that? And the answer is in a lot of ways. But then what I mean by like constraints is like in today's world of labor shortages and candidates basically being in the driver's seat, like you can't as a scientist say, well, to really do this well, you need to give an hour-long assessment. You just can't do that anymore. So you could say, well, that's the only science way to do it. Or you can say, you know what, a 15-minute assessment isn't going to give you as much, but it's going to give you a lot better than that old resume and hiring manager interview. So it's that constant interplay. And then it's always, you have to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. And the speed, because of the changing technology and obviously artificial intelligence, that's the question too. How do I take this science that is built for thinking of the 1970s and then apply it to this modern world where we now have generative AI and we're able to do all of this with technology? And so that's really been the fun part for me, is like that challenge is the exciting one. And I would say like we've done it pretty well because like we've had a good like over 2 decades and we're still relevant and we're way bigger than we were 2 decades ago. And I think that's really been the key to success.
It's like a really pragmatic application. I like too that's like, it's so much of it is like better than the alternative within these constraints. I think especially when you look at like psychological science on this, you're like, is it perfect? No, but you have to, but we'll never be perfect when it comes to hiring. Can we be better than what people would do alternatively?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We'll never be perfect. That shouldn't be the standard. All too often, that's the way that we think, or we're held to that standard. And it's really, no, we can be better than the alternative. And we have reams and reams of data that say like, yeah, we are way better than the alternative. Yeah.
Nice. So getting to that, as you said, you've been doing this for a long time. When you go into companies and you look at hiring, are there technology and solutions that you're like, I can't believe companies aren't using this? This is like so proven and effective, and it kind of baffles you that whether it's, from your company or just in general, where you're like, I can't believe people are still hiring this way and aren't using this.
Well, yeah, I wake up and say that every single day because, hiring's a space that's just like been fundamentally broken for decades, and there's been progress made, but not as fast a progress as you would think. And so I'll take that question and kind of use it as a jumping off point. So like pre-employment assessment, that's my career. I see how well it works. And that baffles me that are many companies adopting them? Yes. But what you see is that when there are labor shortages, and the pressure starts to get ratcheted up. You see business after business making decisions we need to pull the assessment because we're losing 20% of our applicants, or they won't take, and it's so short-sighted to say, so now we have zero quality filter. We are going to move fast. But like, what good is it to move fast when you're not getting the right outcome? Like automating, I probably shouldn't say, but like automating stupidity is really easy. But like, that's not the right answer. So like, that's kind of a frustration. But to take this and put a positive spin on it is part of it is like, the assessments historically are kind of like they benefit the organization. There's far less benefit in it for the candidate. And we tried to, we created the virtual job tryout and try to make, we made it more two-way information exchange. And we solved for that a little bit. But in the end, the consumer of the information is the organization, and they're ultimately going to use it to prioritize candidates and determine if they move forward. What we've started to do is say, well, historically in our space, where we've used assessment is post-apply. Somebody comes onto a career site, they say, aha, that's the job I want, they apply, and then we're going to assess them. And we're going to assess them against that one job, and they're going to use that information to determine if they move forward or not. Well, in talking with our clients, they said, well, the idea of matching people to jobs, it actually starts way before somebody applies. It starts above the funnel. It starts when job seekers come to our career site. So can you do your magic hocus pocus with science and do it before they apply? And I said, you know what, we can, and that's a great idea. So like that concept is more come to the career site. Some people know exactly what they want. Typically more senior people. If I'm a software developer, I'm going to look for software jobs. A lot of the hiring companies are more in that early career. And you're kind of expecting that a job seeker, one, knows what they like, what motivates them, what kind of work do I like, who am I, what's my style, what do I think I'm good at. We're giving them a lot of credit that, one, they know themselves. And then the second piece where we're falling down is that we think our job descriptions and our requisitions are doing a great job of giving job seekers everything they need to know to say, like, yeah, that sounds like a dream job for me. So it's really based on this those two fundamental flaws to say, well, what if we turn this around and we help like the job seeker be the consumer of the information? It works for the organization as well, where we say, hey, need some help navigating? And we launched this new solution called Find My Fit. And it's a quick assessment that a job seeker can optionally take, that they're going to learn about. We're going to learn about their interests, what motivates you, what kind of work's exciting versus not exciting, what's your style, what's your background. And then we use that to, one, give job seekers feedback, which job seekers rarely get any feedback. So like, hey, whether you end up here or not, here's some information on this is the stuff you like, this is the stuff you're good at. But then what we do is then we use artificial intelligence then to take what we've learned about them and map them against the jobs of that organization and say, based on what you told us, based on what we learned about you, here are 5 jobs that seem to match what you're looking for. And so now, like, job seekers love that kind of assessment because there's something in it for them. And then what you're doing for the organization, you're starting to match earlier to make sure that these people that are coming to our career sites are super valuable because there's not a lot of candidates out there. So let's make sure we get them in the right place to start with, rather than just like Russian roulette, figure out what job you're going to do, and then we'll assess you against that. So that's like the innovation, like what company should be doing. Like, I think that's where, and I'm not saying we don't have it completely solved yet. This is like a first toe in the water of doing it. But I think that's where we need to evolve to.
Yeah, well, I sort of unpack some of this. I mean, because like it's funny, you kind of went from like previous successes to current innovations, and it's interesting because it's a shift in mindset. I think the first point that you talked about is, the hiring decision. I always talk about there's no bigger decision that affects an employee than the decision to hire them. Everything else comes out of that, and it's not good for the company or the employee to be hired into a job that's a bad fit, right? So the fact that companies rush through it is not good for the company, but it's not good for the employee either, right?
Mm-mm.
But that point that you made, though, that we know we have tools that enable us to make better decisions, but the challenge is getting people to like actually take those tools. It's kind of like, I know that it's good to like eat fiber every day, but the challenge is getting me to eat fiber every day.
Yeah. No.
But
We
I
got
think
we got
part of
plenty
the
of fiber
issue,
for you at HireVue.
yeah, and part of the issue, Steve, is it's easy to eat fiber. You go down and you find whatever, some fruit, and you have some fiber. But the interaction between a potential candidate and a hiring manager, right? The interview where the candidate is trying to sell you on themselves, but also evaluate your organization, and the hiring manager is trying to evaluate you, but also sell you on the organization. It's like one of the most complex interactions in all of business. And to do that unsupported with with good, strong types of analytics or input is, I think, nearly impossible. Um, what types of talk to me about what types of if you don't mind,
Yeah.
talk to me about what types of support do you give to that particular interaction, because you can moneyball the top of the funnel all you want, but then if your hiring managers fail to perform on this optimal set of candidates, then it's a big problem versus a great, highly excellent team.
Right. Yeah. And Jordan, it's really about it's kind of taking risk out of the process. You're never going to get it 100% right. Like you're evaluating jobs, you're evaluating human beings, but you can increase your hit rate. And so, kind of what you said is accurate in that you're trying to get the most qualified people. You're not picking the person for them. I don't think it's ever going to evolve to that, nor should it. But you're saying fish here, not there. Like your hit rate in this pool right here is going to be 85%. This pool, it's going to be 60, and this is 20. But like human nature is, the gold is always in the 20. It's like, no, focus here. So we have a variety of different solutions, tools, and whether those be assessments, whether those even be giving structure to interviews. So yes, we have video and audio interview, technology-enabled interviews, but we have ways that, okay, if we're not going to machine score it, we can at least make sure that people are doing good interviews and identifying good questions, and do that in an automated way. So like we have what's called an interview builder product that we make it easy. A hiring manager or a recruiter can just go in and say, what's my job title? Put that in, and through artificial intelligence, we're gonna map that to ONET, which is basically all jobs have been profiled, and say, we know what success is in this job. Here are a set of questions that you should ask, and behaviorally anchored rating scales that go with that. So again, mitigating risk that, okay, if you actually use this interview guide, you're going to be asking the right questions. You're going to be doing more objective interviews.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so much of providing these different tools. I think one of the things that you shared, though, when you're talking about the sort of the current innovations, is this focus more, and I really liked how you put it, that assessment information is for the company, it's not for the candidate. How do we create it more? And, the quality of who you hire is entirely dependent on who applies. Before the decision that the biggest decision that affects the quality of hire is a decision made by a candidate to apply to begin with. So looking at that, and I think what sort of success are you having, like getting candidates to spend more time? Because you also commented like people don't even know what they're good at often. That's like, we know those psychologists. What sort of success, or what are you seeing happening in the technology space that is really helping people have better self-awareness of what they're good at? Because that's not easy to do.
Right. Now, I mentioned the Find My Fit solution that we launched, and we're getting great data. Conceptually, it says, hey, that really makes sense. And now the data is starting to support that. We might be onto something here. So like some of the things that we've seen, the data that we see is one, like, so we, like our best, the longest user of this was sort of a beta launch was a telecommunications company, big telecom that you're familiar with. And they were using it they have lots of early career jobs. They're using it there. And what they found is after they launched it, a couple months after they launched it, it became the #1 piece of consumed information on their entire career site. So,
Wow.
and it's optional, right? Like we do everything to get people to take assessments once they apply, and but like, then you make it for them and it's there to help you, it blows up, it goes viral.
Right.
So like step one, that's a good sign. And then what we ask all these job seekers, we have a questionnaire after they complete it.
Mhm.
And some of the other kind of highlights, 91% of job seekers say they're seeing and considering jobs they otherwise wouldn't have, or they didn't even know exist. That's another problem. Like companies with lots of jobs, guess like, what's your job title, Steve?
I'm a chief expert, Mike.
Well, everybody knows what that is, right? No, I knew your job title and I thought it'd be a great example, but every organization has these jobs. You're like, what the heck is this? Now, somebody's probably going to apply for a chief expert because I think there's a lot of people that think they're qualified for a chief expert job.
Yeah, you got to be a junior expert for a while before you can become a chief.
You got to work your way up the ladder. Yeah. So again, 91% of candidates were seeing these jobs that they didn't know exist. They weren't, and they were interesting to them. Then they kind of see increased conversion rates of people actually applying. Those that apply that come into that channel are less likely to withdraw their applications. They stick with it longer. Again, because where they started it with, like, hey, I've been matched up to a job through this, Find My Fit solution. So, and then the other, the really powerful thing that was sort of unexpected, and maybe we should have expected it, but we also observed, the organization observed, increased diversity in some jobs that completely lack diversity. So telecommunications, every telecommunications company has a field service technician job. If you've ever had a cable installer come to your house, I'm betting that person was a male, because there are very few female field service technicians, and very few apply. And it's not because they can't do the job. It's sort of this like, well, that's a man's kind of job. I can't, and women tend to, there's research, women tend to underestimate their abilities where men tend to overestimate. And so what we've seen is that, when females go through this Find My Fit, a lot of them are getting like, hey, field service technician seems to be something you would be interested in. And they've more than doubled their female application numbers through just telling people like, this, you'd be a good fit for that. So, and another job is a door-to-door salesperson. They've seen that massive increase there. So it's a nice byproduct that you start to break down some of these stereotypes with jobs, and you can start to increase diversity of your applicant pool, which is going to help you with the applicant of your diversity of your hires then. Then now we're tracking these people and we're seeing that, guess what? They're staying longer. If you came in through Find My Fit and you were pointed to the job versus I found it myself, you're staying longer. Like initially quick terminations, and now we follow these people out over a year now, and they've seen over 100% increase in retention. Again, like, tell me what you like. Here's a job for you. Like it makes a lot of sense, but now we're seeing data that it actually does help retain people too.
That's really, yeah, this is really cool, because and it really just started, you say, about reframing that we had this technology that we use to give the company information, and can we reframe it to give the candidates this information? Because it's like that, I know more than your typical bearer about this particular space of HR technology, but it's just repositioning what you were doing from a company perspective, or a candidate perspective, and the impact that it's having. That's really, really fascinating. What about failures or mistakes when you look at this? You've been in this space for a long time. What do you think are things that we are doing or have done or shouldn't do when it comes to using technology to improve quality of hire?
Yeah, and this one, it might not be the popular opinion on this or take on this, but I am pretty passionate about it, and I've been in the space long enough that I have some pretty set observations on this. It's just like, again, I said earlier, like the talent acquisition hiring is fundamentally broken. And one of the primary reasons it's fundamentally broken, if you go back to like pre-technology, What did it look like? Well, we would put a want ad in a newspaper, and then somebody would type up their cover letter and their resume, and they would send it in, and then we would get a pot like, and we laugh at that, but then we look at a lot of our technologies have like, hey, that process is awesome. How can we do that faster and better, right? So the problem is like starting with you're matching, but you're starting with two fundamentally flawed pieces of information that you're trying to match on. Job descriptions, like, okay, not all job descriptions are bad, but I would say most of them, how are they developed? I talked to the hiring manager, what are you looking for? HR says, well, we need this. And wow, all these competencies look the same across the, so there's not really a like, are we really looking at, well, yeah, you need that, but what really differentiates success in this role? What are the key success factors and failure points, et cetera? So we don't have great data there about jobs typically. And then the resume, again, like as an industrial organizational psychologist, and Steve, you are too, you're familiar with the literature, decades of research and meta-analyses that say the resume has next to zero predictive validity of on-the-job performance. It's almost completely zero. And it makes sense because of it's boiled myself down into one sheet of paper, typically, and I know I need to load it up with buzzwords, and some candidates might get help and pay to help people write a resume. So it's not standardized at all. So there's no, and it's only looking at a person's backward looking. It's not looking at what their potential is. So all of that, but like we've built an industry of technology on top of that. So like resume parsing, like all of the tech spend and most organizations have it to take this document that has next to no validity in it and to like, let's go from zero and like, let's try to squeeze something out of that to get the right words out. So like that to me has been something where, I don't think we do ourselves a great service as a field with that kind of that technology. And then others, like so much is built upon that. Like now, like I love where we're going with, and I'll talk about this later on skills-based hiring, but the foundation of skills-based hiring now is good old resumes and job descriptions largely, like, and I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but that's not all of it. We can use artificial intelligence to kind of mine all of that to have an understanding, but there's people out there that know more about jobs than resumes and job descriptions that need to kind of be leading us forward as well.
I think that's a really good observation. I like that. Like I basically had this flawed thing of job descriptions and resumes, and a lot of the hiring processes are just modern versions of job descriptions and resumes. And then what I get concerned sometimes is the generative AI, which on one hand, I'm not saying we shouldn't use it, but yeah, we can create more job descriptions and resumes from previous job descriptions and resumes. We're just kind of stirring shit. Pardon my language.
And the same thing with resumes. I can use Gen I to put a great resume together because it's learned from all of the other.
Oh my God.
All of the other noise that's out there. So, yeah. And again, I'm not saying there's not a place at all, but again, if that can't be all of our thinking, and we need to question ourselves, like, is that really the foundation we want to build from?
That was interesting.
And one question I have is like the resume now is just a tool for essentially like search engine optimization, right? So the tools and the technology that people are using are parsing the resumes, looking for the right buzzwords, the right skills, the right whatever. How does that, in filtering that through, how does that help organizations actually hire great people? Or does it not? Does it just filter out potential? And the flip side is, let's say you could do away with resumes almost entirely. How would you do it? How would you create the recruiting environment so that it was more frictionless and more accretive to the organization itself?
Yeah. So your first question, I say you could argue that it is adding value. And I think, are there cases where it does? Certainly. Like when you need a very precise type of experience, and there are certainly jobs like that, right? Professions like that, but I think they're more in the minority, then it can be helpful. I think the other thing that kind of complicates things here is that, that model was also born out of a time where jobs and work was much more static. And it was about linear career progression. And like, so this idea of, man, I need to get me one of these. I don't have any tools to help me assess people. What I can look for are proxy measures. If they've done this before, they're probably going to be good. But the reality is jobs are changing faster than they ever have. New jobs are being created faster than they ever have. And so if you think about trying to look in somebody's past and try to find experiences on a resume for jobs that are changing and new jobs, it becomes less and less valuable. So yeah, you need a new way. And Jordan, if I had the answer to like the perfect answer, then, I'd probably be on a beach somewhere because I would have figured it out. But, what I will say is that, it is, and again, there's a bit of a bias here from the background that I come from as an industrial organizational psychologist.
Sure.
But it is about more direct measurement of those skills. And we need to continue to advance the science. So we have simulations, we have the ability to, I would say like an interview is a kind of show me, can you do this, as opposed to like looking at a resume. And we have like it blows me away to see the sophistication with which we can automatically score an interview now. But there's still a long way to go there to have like an answer that completely replaces a resume. Like I think there are interim steps, and it is have a place for that. There's a place for looking back, but we need to challenge ourselves to say, hey, it doesn't tell me about the person's potential, what they can do. And so let's make sure we fold that piece in as well to complement it, rather than just rely on kind of like rear view HR.
Yeah, I think that rear view, that's a good point. I mean, we keep getting this. I think, the resume, I think it does have value for people saying, this is kind of what I want to be recognized for. And it certainly can be a way to get noticed, but then you have the challenge. A lot of people don't know how to write resumes and they don't know to put the right thing on. So we should not over rely on them for sure.
Right.
It's also is interesting too. Also on the job description, there's some interesting research I just saw where companies are dropping college degree requirements from their job description requirements, and it's having very little impact actually on increasing diversity of hire and the other things it's supposed to do, because the point was made to what you're saying, that people don't think they're qualified for these roles. If we don't go out and find some way to engage candidates to help them demonstrate their potential more, they're not going to be recognized. So this idea of sort of like using technology to help uncover the capabilities of people more effectively, as opposed to relying on sort of resumes, I think that's really interesting. I have a very specific question, because something has happened with customers I've worked with in the last 2 years that if you'd asked me like 5 or 6 years ago would have happened, I would have said no. Companies are now hiring people without ever actually talking to them. It's entirely automated. And I personally, I could argue plus and minus. I'm really curious your thought on that, but it's for jobs where they said, look, the applicant dropout rate and the no-show rate was so higher that basically we select them when they show up in the first week of the job. So the whole automated hiring process is just to see the minimum requirements, and then they show up. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts on this sort of like trend for some jobs to say, hey, we're just not even going to talk to people. We're going to make the whole thing automated?
Yeah, and we do have clients that have gone there, and we've helped them with solutions to get there. And so I think there is a place for it, but the place is, again, it's a certain type of job. It is a job that if you think about, okay, what do I actually assess and learn about a candidate when I'm talking to them? And, so can they actually talk to human beings? Can they interrelate? Like, okay, any job that requires that, that's going to be a big miss if you don't have an interview, if you don't have that part in it. But if you're like a warehouse worker, where that is so like, it's not completely unimportant, but it is way far down the list. And we just need we need people to show up. We need them to work hard. We need them to be safe. And those are things that you can assess arguably better than you can with an assessment than you can in an interview. So I think in those cases, it does make sense. And again, back to those practical realities of if we introduce an interview to the process, we introduce friction, especially for this particular applicant pool. And so we now decrease our ability to actually fill these positions that we have. And then, our clients that moved there didn't just kind of say, hey, can we talk to you about this? This was like, we had been working with them for years, and they did it informed by data to say, you know what, our hit rate is higher with the assessment's the most valid thing in the whole process. And we evaluated the hiring manager interview, and we found out that it adds no value at all. So we are comfortable eliminating it from the process. So our clients that moved there did it data informed, as opposed to just like, we're gonna throw that out. But I wouldn't advise, I wouldn't advise it for your next CEO. But even for customer facing jobs, I mean, you can do a good job of assessing that through assessments, but having an interview, and I don't know if you meant talking to somebody like a live interview, because you can also replace that with an on-demand interview. So where an asynchronous interview, where you would still get like, how well is this person able to communicate? Are they able to establish rapport with the camera? Whatever. So you could still have that piece of it, but do it in an automated way where you're not actually having a touch point with the candidate.
Yeah, I think there's a certain element of it too, that depending on the job, where candidates would want to also have a human touch. But I think that point is that doing it in a data informed way. I did hear one interesting that's coming out of it. I know companies now that they're saying we have to do careful checks to make sure the person who shows up to work is actually the person we hired.
Right.
This is happening more, which is this is an interesting variable. I want to get our next question, which is the wish list. When you look at the work that you're doing, going back to the integrate or die concept, what is something that you're never going to build at HireVue, or you don't expect to, but you wish somebody else would build because it would make the work you do better?
Yeah, and this it's along a similar trend that I've shared already, but we live in a world in talent acquisition that is requisition based, and again, that is also kind of a root of all evil. I mean, it sets, like, some of these constraints that we have are based on that, and I get there's good reason for it, but what it does, and again, this is another kind of epiphany I had, like, about the newspaper, but this is another one, is like the most common visual we use for a hiring process, talent acquisition, is the funnel, right? So you start off, you put your requisition out there, you spend all these dollars to bring people to your career site, and they're at the top of the funnel where it's nice and wide. And you got 100 people that you put in the funnel, and then you do all this stuff, you do assessments and you do interviews, and you're screening people out. And then lo and behold, you get your 1, your 2, your 3, your 4, your 5 people that you ultimately hire. And that's the way talent acquisition works today. Like, if you think about that, and we're in the midst of a huge talent shortage, we're starting with 100. We have 100 people coming to our career site saying, I have potential, I want to work with you, and I applied for this job, and now I'm one of 100. And 95 are told, sorry, no thanks. And we have these huge constraints, another job. So, like, the funnel is such a bad model for what we're doing, and it's because of this requisition. Like, at the end of every funnel is a separate requisition. So it goes back to, like, this concept of matching starts above, pre-apply, but that's like, moves us away from a requisition and more of a job seekers coming to a career site, and the goal, what the company does is like, great, so happy you're here, let us help get you into the right job, and pushing them along, instead of like, here's all our job postings, go find the right one. So that's like, I don't know if it'll ever happen in my lifetime, but like, I think that would probably open up a lot of other issues, but solve for a lot of the constraints we have today.
Is it sort of like, if I'm understanding, you're really kind of going from the way it has always been, as companies say, we have an opening, go get candidates, but you could switch around to say, we have a really good candidate, create an opening.
Yeah, right.
Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Model. Yeah, it's complete. It's flipping the model in a lot of ways. That's the same. Yeah, that's the same way. It's like bringing people to your career site to help them find the right opportunity, as opposed to just to apply to apply for a job, and the technology's there to do it. I mean, we have solutions to help with that now. It's just we're bound to how things have always worked, and it goes back, and again, I would argue it goes back to the want ad, send in the resume, and we still kind of think like that as a profession.
Well, and it ties to a little bit of what companies are starting to do internally with this idea of skills-based management, where people, instead of being stuck in jobs, we move them around on different projects, which is a whole nother topic. But it is this idea of thinking of people as sort of can do a lot of different things, as opposed to slotting people into certain, round holes into round pegs. We got one more question. Well, I guess two more quick last questions. This one really quickly, short one. Career guidance. So you've been in this field. What if somebody's like out there and we need more people in this field of technology? What career guidance would you give to somebody who's like thinking, gee, I'd kind of like to get into this world of like staffing, hiring, technology? What is it, the things you think people should be focused on?
Yeah, I mean, this is, maybe this is a completely obvious one, but I'll say it anyway. Is like, I think if you're going to go into HR tech, you need to have a foundational understanding of artificial intelligence in today, because it's going to be part of the stack somewhere, regardless of what kind of HR tech you're going into. And I'm not saying everybody has to become a data scientist and people need to go take a Python course and learn how to, but they need to be conversant. They need to understand the basics of artificial intelligence and like what's the difference between machine learning and deep learning, generative AI, large language models. Like they need to understand that, because it's going to influence, like it's going to have an impact no matter where they sit in the organization. I think it does have benefit. The other one, that I don't necessarily have, so I'm kind of criticizing myself, is that, I was never a user of HR tech. I was never a buyer. So I don't have that perspective, but I have people on my team who do. And I'm like, wow, you're so much smarter than me. And it's just like, you have this perspective that I could never have. And it's really powerful. It's powerful because I learn from you, but it's powerful like when you're talking to other clients, they have so much more credibility when they're kind of talking about the technology. And that's something, it's too late for me. But I'm passing on to the younger generation that I think like get that experience is gold for a career in HR tech.
I think that's really true. I mean, I spent some of my career on the other side, as you will, and understand, as you say, you're working in a world of constraints, and a lot of people building this technology have no sense of what it's actually like to be a practitioner and be in that area. So, and some seem to have no sense of what it's like to actually be an employee. You're like, what the
right.
So, very last question that we've got, Mike, is what is a question we should be asking about the future of HR technology that we've not asked? And the caveat is, you also want you to answer it. So,
well, the unfortunate part of this is, through our conversation, you kind of already asked it, or Jordan did, and kind of when I thought through that ahead of time. But really, the question that I had is like, how do we as a field really get, like, skills-based hiring is the way to go, but we're light years away from it. And Steve, you cited an article, and I might have read the same one or a different one, just to say about like removing the educational requirement from job postings and the tiny impact that's actually had as they research it. So we're still so far away. I spoke at a conference. I spoke at Unleash last year in Paris, and everything was about skills-based hiring, like where it felt like, wow, every single organization's doing it. Like everybody's talking about it. So in my session, I asked like, how many people are actually doing it? How many companies are actually doing it? And it was less than 5% of the hands went up. So everybody's talking about it, but we're so far away from doing it. And I think Jordan asked the question, like, so how do you do it? And that is the right question. And I don't think we have it solved yet. But what I do know is like what the answer is not. Like, is artificial intelligence the answer? No. is it an important part of getting to the answer? Absolutely. But just mining what's out there currently to create skills taxonomies and then to figure out paths and how you move in similar jobs, that's super cool. That's informative, but it's not the complete answer. Like, again, we need to be better than that. We need people who like understand how organizations work and understand the data beyond just what's on the, and that's where like IO psychology fits in. And that's where I think IO psychologists would have great impact here, but us as a field have always been slow to get on these kind of rocket ship next innovations. And that's where, you know, so like laying down the gauntlet to like, we can contribute so much in this area. And we just like IO psychologists need to be part of these firms that are working on these. I mean, certainly we're working on it. We have plenty of IO psychologists, but there's a lot of other firms that are kind of become the leaders in this space that might not even have an IO psychologist working at them, or somebody that really understands work and understands assessment of people.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful too. I mean, because we need to discover the skills and capabilities that people have that you're not going to get from these traditional passive things,
Right.
and that self-discovery. And I'd also say going on, it's also a part of biopsychology that's kind of been lost, which is more cognitive skill psychology, really getting into, you know, the fundamental things that enable people to learn mathematical skills versus language skills versus, you know, that's an area that our field's gotten away from. So really fascinating.
Right,
Well,
yeah.
Jordan, do you have any last questions for Mike before we sign off?
Well, I gotta say, I wish we could spend another hour or two just talking about the downstream effects of all the things we're doing. Certainly, when you think about recruiters and what they're comped on versus what actually matters when you hire an employee and how long that takes and how long, hopefully, their life cycle is. I encourage everyone to think about that and the misalignment there. But right now, I think Mike shared some great information. I absolutely think considering new approaches and being dynamic in the way you hire and attract candidates rather than like we've done it this way before. We've got resumes and we've got, you know, the whole thing. Figure out what works, work with a great partner who can help you do the analytics if you don't have IO psychologists, and, you know, streamline your process so you both get the candidate experience right and the hiring manager and the organizational experience right. I think this is one of the most interesting and exciting shows we've done, and I love the topic. So maybe Mike will come back so we can do a data integration deep dive.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And just so you know, Mike, we talk about our shows like we talk about our children. They're all the best.
They are all the best.
Yeah, no, I get it. No, it was fun. And yeah, like Jordan, you hit on, like that would be a topic for a whole other show. Yeah, the downstream, how recruiters are compensated is a part of our challenge for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, whole recruiting and the focus on time to hire and all the other thing. Yeah. So wow.
That's it.
Well, Mike,
Yeah.
thanks so much for preparing an integrator dive. This was fascinating. And we will look forward to maybe having that follow-up conversation because this is an area that is changing so quickly that if we talked again in 6 months, I bet it would be almost like a different conversation. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Mike.
All right.